Greetings, vinyl community. Today I'm bringing you another video about a 50-year-old album from my collection. And if you want to get super picky and technical, it's closer to 49 1/3 because this is an album I received for Christmas in 1969. It is the first album by Blood, Sweat and Tears, Child is Father to the Man. And I'm going to point out Al Kooper, organist and lead singer on this album, because he's a central figure in the saga. When you hear the phrase blood, sweat, and tears, I think most people associate that with Winston Churchill, who actually spoke of blood, toil, tears, and sweat. Before that, there was a speech by Theodore Roosevelt that mentioned blood and sweat and tears, but it's a phrase that's been used many times over the years, and it goes at least as far back as John Donne in the 1600s writing a poem that mentions tears or sweat or blood. But as for the actual band name origin, one version of the story is that Al Kooper was on the phone with a promoter making arrangements for their first gig when they just had the quartet in place, and he needed to come up with a band name on the spur of the moment, and his eyes lit on a 1963 album by Johnny Cash that presumably happened to be lying there, titled Blood, Sweat, and Tears. As for the title of the album, Child is Father to the Man, that comes from a William Wordsworth poem. The band Blood, Sweat, and Tears is essentially an offshoot of the Blues Project. This is the third album by the Blues Project, live at Town Hall, and Al Kooper was a member of the Blues Project, and Blood, Sweat and Tears guitarist Steve Katz was also a member of the Blues Project, and the two of them hated each other. So Al Kooper left the band. You can see on YouTube a video of Blues Project at the Monterey Pop Festival performing Flute Thing, which is a bit of a signature piece. Their bass player switches over to flute, and Steve Katz switches over to the bass. And at the end of this video, you'll see Al Kooper in the audience, applauding and not looking really happy. So that's a bit interesting. Steve Katz actually left the band also not long afterwards. Their other guitar player, Danny Kalb, followed, and eventually the rhythm section of Blues Project evolved into C-Train. So meanwhile, Al Kooper hooked up with the drummer Bobby Colomby, who was already planning to put a band together with his close friend, Steve Katz. So Kooper and Katz ended up working together again. And they still hated each other, so what could go wrong? But Al Kooper called in the bassist Jim Fielder, and the foundation of Blood, Sweat and Tears was in place. Eventually they added the four-piece horn section, which was Al Kooper's plan all along. And Blood, Sweat and Tears became one of the first, if not the first, rock band with a full horn section as an integral part of the band, and not just session men or a disposable auxiliary, as was the case with other brass rock bands of the 60s like the Brooklyn Bridge or the Buckinghams. So, the first album, Child is Father to the Man, produced by John Simon, who also contributed piano and organ and conducted the string section. This album starts off with the string section. It starts off with an overture written by Al Kooper. And this is like a Broadway-type overture that previews tunes and riffs from the various songs on the album. And the music is performed by the 12-piece Blood, Sweat and Tears string ensemble, which consists of session string players, including very noted violinists Anahita Jemian and Gene Orloff, plus percussion and demented cackling. The first song proper on the album is I Love You More Than You'll Ever Know, written by Al Kooper, and they really jump in with both feet to make a statement. It's a powerful bluesy R&B song with a 6/8 beat. You've got the jazz influence right up front, you've got the blues influence right up front, you've got steaming rock and roll right up front, and the full forces of the 8-piece band joined by the 12-piece string section and the Blood, Sweat and Tears soul chorus going ooh. The soul chorus is Valerie Simpson of Ashford and Simpson fame with Melba Moorman. Al Kooper in the notes claims influence of Janis Joplin on the vocal, at least for the word all right. And Steve Katz is very notable for playing with a sound that recalls Eric Clapton, very heavily overdriven sustain, heavy finger vibrato. And Fred Lipsius on alto saxophone proves himself to be the band's secret weapon with the first of a number of burning solos that he plays on this album. The second track on the album is Morning Glory, and this is a song by Tim Buckley. They do a number of covers on this album, so this is the first in that series. The Blood, Sweat and Tears arrangement treats it to a cinematic brass fanfare. Steve Katz takes over on vocals for this one. The song itself is a haunting song with lyrics about a man who lures a hobo to his house and tries to get a vicarious thrill by hearing stories of the hobo's life, only to freak out in frustration when the hobo refuses and walks away. The Blood, Sweat and Tears version has an interesting twist not in the original by Tim Buckley, in that they repeat the first verse, so there's a cycle in that story starting over again in this version. That's followed by My Days Are Numbered, another Al Kooper original, nice soulful song with good tempo changes and some psychedelic backwards guitar. Don't really associate Blood, Sweat and Tears with psychedelia, but on this album there are definitely some psychedelic touches here and there. Next song is Without Her, and that's a song by Harry Nilsson. Not to be confused with Nilsson's big hit Without You, which was not a song written by Harry Nilsson. That was, of course, a cover of the Badfinger song. But this is a song that Nilsson recorded on his album Pandemonium Shadow Show. And the original version has a very strange and dark arrangement. It starts out with the vocal being accompanied just by bass, gradually joined by cello and flute, which have a very busy chamber music sound, and finally some guitar strums, and that's it. Blood, Sweat and Tears totally turns it around and gives it an easy listening Latin feel with tinkling cocktail piano and Tijuana Brass type horns. And in fact, Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass did cover the song about a year later. Fred Lipsius adds a little psychedelic touch at the end with an echoed saxophone freakout. And this is followed by another cover, Randy Newman's song this time, Just One Smile. Randy Newman didn't record it. This is before he had started making albums of his own, but it was a single by Gene Pitney in 1966. And Blood, Sweat and Tears does a very elaborate arrangement that even includes a fugue section with two organs in counterpoint, played by Al Kooper and John Simon, and Steve Katz switching over to the lute. That's the end of side one. Side two begins with I Can't Quit Her, written by Al Kooper with Irwin Levine. Irwin Levine and Al Kooper also collaborated on Gary Lewis and the Playboys' This Diamond Ring, a big hit that they did together. Irwin Levine is also guilty of co-writing all of Tony, Orlando, and Dawn's big hits. Yes, Candida and Knock 3 Times, and Tie a Yellow Ribbon, and Has Anybody Seen My Sweet Gypsy Rose, all those. Blame them on Irwin Levine. But this is a great pounding rocker with punchy brass and strings. And this was the one song from this album that was still in the band's repertoire when I saw them live in 1970. At that time, Al Kooper was out of the equation, and it was sung by David Clayton Thomas. That was one interesting note about that concert was the opening act was up-and-coming folk singer named John Denver. And the soul chorus returns on this, and we get another short burst of backwards guitar by Steve Katz. Next song is Megan's Gypsy Eyes, and this is the big psychedelic move on the album. Steve Katz is on vocals again. Steve Katz wrote the song with an elusive Dylan-esque lyric that mentions purple drops of rain, so ha-ha Prince. Steve Katz's voice is double-tracked. One track is dry or normal sounding, and the other overdub has a distorted warble. He's apparently singing through a Leslie organ speaker. Al Kooper plays an Explorer organ by RMI, an Allen Explorer organ, which has this strange warbling sound of its own, and at the end he plays an ondioline, which is similar to the clavioline, an early electronic instrument heard on Baby You're a Rich Man by the Beatles. And you'll hear a very similar sound to that Indian shawm-like effect that you hear on Baby You're a Rich Man at the end of Megan's Gypsy Eyes. Next up is Something Going On, composed by Al Kooper, and not to be confused with Something Comin' On, which appears on Blood, Sweat and Tears' third album. That's a cover of a Joe Cocker song. But this one is the album's epic at 8 minutes long. It has a very similar feel to the first main song on the album, I Love You More Than You'll Ever Know. It's got that similar 6/8 blues jazz feel. But this is closer to a standard blues, still much more elaborate, not just a 12-bar blues by any means. Al Kooper has a great testifying vocal turn where he exhorts Fred Lipsius to blow a series of mini alto sax solos, which is not on a mini alto sax, but brief solos, and very squeaky and soulful and skronky. Next track on the album, House in the Country, another Al Kooper original. This is the album's comedy song, and it's definitely got a bit of the flavor of Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, circa Absolutely Free. The bass player, Jim Fielder, was a former member of the Mothers of Invention. This is adorned by wacky, cacophonous voices and animal sounds. There's a strange little saloon honky-tonk piano break. It features backwards tambourine and cowbell and a spacey electronic effect on the chorus where the vocal seems to zoom off into infinity. And that's followed with one of my favorite tracks from the album, The Modern Adventures of Plato, Diogenes, and Freud. Another original by Al Kooper. Very far-out lyrics, and as the liner notes attest, this song concerns the professions of psychiatry and messiatry. The band does not play. Cooper's vocal is backed by just the string section, with very colorful string writing, using a lot of various trick sounds like tremolo and strange glissandos and pizzicatos to imitate a ticking clock mentioned in the lyrics. Last track on the album is So Much Love, written by Jerry Goffin and Carole King. This was a soul ballad originally recorded by Ben E. King and drastically rearranged by Blood, Sweat and Tears. They lose the prominent bass line of the original, but they add a dramatic, propulsive feel, and this leads into a brief reprise of the album opening overture performed by the Strings, and a big final yeah. So here's the album on the 2i Columbia label, if you're an I counter. But even an 8-piece band wasn't big enough to hold both Al Kooper and Steve Katz. So when Katz and Columbia decided that Al Kooper wasn't cutting it as their lead singer, Kooper got the boot. And his replacement was the English-born Canadian singer David Clayton Thomas, very much a stronger singer than Al Kooper, despite having a bit of a Vegas vibe. He's really more of a Tom Jones type singer, and there's nothing wrong with that. There was also a reshuffling of the horn section, which involved their trombone player Dick Halligan being replaced while Halligan moved over to Al Kooper's organ seat, and they brought in a new trombone player. Also, both trumpet players quit, so they brought in new trumpet players. Anyway, after all that happened, the band released their massively successful self-titled second album. I'm afraid I do not still have my vinyl copy of that one. This album relied heavily on covers. They didn't have Al Kooper's songwriting talents anymore. But nonetheless, it spawned 3 massive hit singles, all of which reached number 2 on the charts, starting with the cover of Brenda Holloway's You've Made Me So Very Happy, followed by David Clayton Thomas's original Spinning Wheel, and finally Laura Nyro's And When I Die, which, just as a matter of trivia, was briefly on the top 40 charts at the same time as a completely unrelated song called When I Die. So that's a recurring theme in this video, songs that have almost the same title. Blood, Sweat, and Tears continues to this day, at least in name, because nobody in the current lineup, which is ever changing, is anywhere near the original members. Bobby Columbia, who was the last original member to leave the band in 1977, ended up with the rights to the name, although he doesn't perform with the band. The current lineup includes just one member whose history with the band goes back even before the current decade. So that's it about Blood, Sweat, and Tears. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. Be well, and I'll talk with you again soon. Bye-bye for now.